That was such a great episode. Why didn't more people listen? Sometimes I feel like, is this thing even on? Hi, my name is Neil Matthews. I too have been exactly what I just described. Wondering and wanting a second set of ears to hear my show. Well, that's when I came up with Podcast Insight Solutions, providing you insight and solutions into your show. Whether that be improving your interview style, improving your questions, getting the guests to really come alive, or maybe it's the audio. That's always a little shaky, or maybe it's the editing. I could get better at that. Well, that's where Podcast Insight Solutions comes in. I'd like to listen to your show, provide a second set of ears, and help you come up with solutions to those problem areas in your show. Right now, we're offering a free 30-minute consultation to take your show from meh to shining like a diamond. At Podcast Insight Solutions, we're transforming podcasts with expert insight. Book your consultation today.
Welcome home to Other People's Shoes, where every step tells a story. Get ready for an emotional journey like no other with Homecoming. Our homes are more than just a place. It's where we find safety, comfort, and connection through intimate conversations, heartfelt anecdotes, and inspiring stories. We believe that everyone deserves to feel welcomed and secure in their own home. Let us remind you of the beauty and warmth that home should bring. Other People's Shoes, where every step leads you to Homecoming.
That is right. Welcome home, one and all. Every step, after all, leads you to homecoming. I don't know about anybody else. I love a good movie. I just find it so intriguing. I love the artwork of it. I love the plot. I love the actors. I love seeing the nuances. I love to try to figure out how they put the movie together. That's what I'm thinking about when I'm sitting in Tinseltown Cinemark. That's what I'm thinking about. My wife and I went and saw that movie, Twisters. Now, it's a take on the way back movie of Twister. Well, in the movie Twisters, it actually takes place in Oklahoma, where the wind goes sweeping down the plain. Yeah, it does that. And there's no charge for the singing. It's free. Promise. There will be no Venmo sent to you. Got me thinking of the rushing wind and the winds of change. I think Scorpion sang that, the winds of change. Got me also thinking a step further into this. Next week, I think could be a monumental moment in the history of the United States of America. And again, I don't typically get political. Like, I don't care if you're a donkey. I don't care if you're an elephant. I don't care if you're a hippopotamus. I do care about your voice. And I do care about what you're using and how you're using that voice. And hopefully you're using it to give grace and encouragement and empathy. And so with all that said, let's wrap that up, because sooner or later we're going to have to meet our guest. And help me welcome him in today, if you wouldn't mind, my new friend Josh. How are you today?
I'm doing good. That is quite the introduction. Too many threads to pull on, so I'm happy to be here.
Was it too much though? I try to channel my inner Jimmy Fallon because I've always wanted to be him.
It was wonderful. It was just, I don't want to get us too diverted. There's a lot we could talk about there, so I'm just happy to engage in the conversation with you.
Curious about that for you, that sweeping wind that I think sometimes takes over our country. Maybe way too much. Maybe it makes people's blood boil the minute you say Republican, the minute you say Democrat. We're immediately at odds. In my mind, the best rivalry that ever existed, and that's Duke, North Carolina. You're either on one side or the other. But help me with this. If we were to find your shoes at a front door type situation, what shoes might we find you wearing?
Gosh, good question. So 2 answers, not one, immediately pops into my head. The first is that you probably won't find me wearing shoes. I spent a good deal of time with a good friend in Maui, Hawaii, where the culture there is that they wear either slippers or none at all. Slippers is what their word for sandals. And I know it's kind of ridiculous, but I just kind of got used to it. And even hanging out here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where it's bitterly cold or the surface of the sun sometimes, I try my best not to wear shoes if I can get away with it. That being said, I do a lot of running, never tried barefoot running. I am partial to Brooks. I like the Brooks athletic shoes. They just fit my foot well, and it helps me like I'm running on air, if you will. So I guess Brooks if I had to pick one.
I like Brooks. I do own one single pair of Brooks. They're the Ghost 15s. I just looked at them the other day. Is that a good pair?
Yes. Basically the Ghost, not their top of the line, but it'll definitely do.
Yeah, I've been impressed with them. They're kind of a sea green almost, and then they have like a navy to them. It is not the traditional Carolina blue that I so often tapped on. It took a lot for me to get those because of the color. I was like, hi, yes. Do you have anything in this color? Yeah, the color of my shirt. Yeah, I know I'm wearing everything in that color. No. Could you get some? No. Only in the girls? Okay. That's the problem.
Well, Brooks, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your perspective, I suppose, every year they come out with a new shoe that they change the color. So I don't know how to predict. I think I've got one and there's pretty much tie-dye, which maybe they're running out of ideas at this point.
I feel like Asics was that way because they had the Asics, their triathlon shoe, and I can't even think of what they're called. Anyway, it looked like dumped paint on a shoe because they had several cans. Just looked blotch of just paint colors. And okay, that's what we're doing with shoes now. Okay, all right, good to know. But I miss running. I need to get back into it. My goal is to maybe in 2025 make my return. I want to say I sort of retired. I want to get back into it. I miss it. I have some spikes up here that I need to wear one more time, I feel like.
Try CrossFit, moment of self-delusion. And we would always start the workout session with this dinky little half-mile run, followed by lifting these massive weights above our heads. Most of the individuals in there complained about this half-mile run. Like, that's the easy part. That's the fun part. It's all this lifting that I can't stand.
That's why I couldn't stand CrossFit. I'm the same way. I was like, I'll run all day. Like 7 miles, done. Let's do it. By the way, I was thinking of ASIC Noosa. By the way, try Noosa. I had to look it up because ADD may have kicked in for a second. Josh, help us with this. When I talk about the idea of Republican, Democrat, independent, Roe versus Wade, we've heard all this talk. I'm going to make the country better. I'm going to be great again. We had in our lifetime, I think we're somewhat similar in some age range. I've never seen a presidential nominee or a former president be shot at. Mm-hmm. Whether I liked him or not, that doesn't matter. That was scary. That was a scary moment. Now, it was a setup, inside job. Like, I don't care about any of that nonsense. The fact is it happened. When we talk about this idea of homecoming, what does that mean to you?
It's easy to get very dark and very heavy with politics quickly. I'm glad you asked me that question first, but I think it's helpful to do some, I'm not going to call it lighthearted, but I'm going to call it more hopeful, more clear-eyed, maybe level setting. Put all my cards on the table. I am a lifelong Republican, probably best described as a Trump skeptical Republican. I am no fan of Donald Trump. Definitely consider myself to be a conservative. And one of my favorite conservative philosophers, Sir Roger Scruton, coined this idea, oikophilia, which is the Greek word for love of home. And I think this is very important here because homecoming obviously means a lot of things, and it means a lot of different things to me. Since we're having a conversation about politics, so we're having a conversation about political worldview, say, I think my conservatism is very deeply rooted in this sense, that it begins with a love of these things that we might call home. I don't mean my house. I don't necessarily mean my family. I mean those things that I look around and I say, hey, this got here before I arrived on the scene. My country, the institutions I inhabit, the church I attend. These things existed long before I got here. These things imbue my life with value and meaning. These things are wonderful and valuable. I did not create them. I inherited them. And I'm grateful for them. And I recognize that good things sometimes can be taken from us. And then an appropriate attitude or orientation toward them is to cherish them and be grateful for them and to preserve them and to recognize you're a part of it, to let it change you rather than you trying to change it. And I think a lot of politics can be better if it starts with the lens of gratitude. I define myself again as Republican, as conservative. I try to be very careful that I don't start with, that means I am against X. I'm against progressivism. I'm against the left. I am. But that's not the core of who I am. The core of who I am is, here are the good things I want to preserve, and then I try to build on top of that. That, I guess, I think is a sense of homecoming. What I think of in a political sense anyways, of what home means to me is, here are the things I cherish, and I want to try to preserve them.
If we're really gonna truly try to put on someone else's shoes, is there a pair of shoes I'm not willing to put on? And I had somebody recently kind of push on that for me. And they said to me, knowing that I podcast and I've been doing it now almost 6 years, Neil, is there shoes you wouldn't wear? And I said, give me an example. That's kind of vague. And they said, someone who's homosexual, would you put on their shoes? And I said, we have. And they said, okay, what about someone who doesn't believe anything that you believe in? And I was like, okay, like what? Like a Muslim? And they're like, well, yeah. And I go, done. And they go, oh. I was like, how about LDS? Latter-day Saint. Should we try those shoes on? And they're like, well, yeah, you don't necessarily believe in Mormonism. I'm like, not necessarily. I don't. Have I tried those shoes on? Yeah, I have. Well, what about an atheist? All the time. Easy. Next. What other shoe? Democrat? Okay. And what I'm trying to illustrate, there's not a pair I'm not willing to try. Again, trying is different than saying, okay, you're right. There's a whole different animal there. And to me, I feel like that's what our country needs. Is, Josh, if I somehow gave you the power to change our world politically from that culture, that dynamic, that ecosystem, what's the number one thing you would maybe change?
Oh gosh, that is a big question. The old phrase, none of us are wise enough or good enough to be trusted with unlimited power. So maybe the first thing I should say is, I don't know. Hopefully I will never have that level of responsibility. That being said, a few things do come to mind in this particular moment, in this moment that we're living in. Honestly, I'm going to turn it back to what I had said earlier. I think if we could learn to define our politics by those things that we are grateful for and hope to preserve first, I think that alone would do a great deal of good. I am under no delusions that even if we did that, it means we would somehow not be polarized or partisan, or that we would all agree, or that there wouldn't be animosity out there. But I do think that it would reduce the temperature in a manner that makes it possible for us to have potentially productive conversations, or at least learn how to live in peace with each other.
I think that's what politics lacks. And maybe that's the frustration I run into, is I don't think in any form or fashion, former President Trump is at all thinking, gee, howdy, I wonder how Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee for president, I wonder how she's feeling today. I wonder how these comments I say to her are hurting her. And vice versa. I wonder if Kamala Harris is thinking when she's reading over that speech, oh man, that's a doozy. That's really going to nail Trump. Call him out on all the sins and all the transgressions that he's done. Man, that's going to hurt him. I just wonder in those rooms, if you just ran on merit, if you just ran on, hey, here's where I'm going to be hard on immigration. Hey, here's where I'm going to be maybe lenient on abortion. And again, I'm not saying they should or shouldn't be. I'm just giving examples. Abortion, immigration, foreign policy. Those are the things that we seem to care about as a country. I wonder if you just ran strictly on everybody gets lollipops on Friday, whatever it may be, and you just focused on that and not focused on what they were saying, stay in your lane, stay in your silo, and really just showed the American people who you care about, you'd have my vote. As we sit here, I want to give it to Trump. I'm so incredibly concerned that if Kamala wins, what is our world going to look like? I've seen a world of Trump. I've seen it. I know what happened. We had a pretty good economy, low gas prices, all the things that seem to affect me, but I don't know about her. I don't. She's a wild card. Supposedly she was in charge of the border. If that is true, again, what's real, what's not, I don't know. It feels like a magic trick sometimes. Like, look over here while we do over here. I don't know. Help me understand that.
Yeah, again, a lot there. I would say that your desire, as you've expressed it, or who you would hope to be able to support as a political candidate is good and laudable. And I don't think I'm going to say anything surprising here. Also, probably unrealistic and naive given our current political conundrum. Doesn't have to be over the long term. What I mean by that is the system as it is currently constructed, the system as it has currently evolved, necessarily rewards those candidates, especially at a presidential level, who reach for that kind of animosity toward the other side. And I don't think they're doing this in bad faith. I do think many Republicans believe, just as many Democrats believe, that the other side represents at worst, an existential threat to the country, and at best, individuals who maybe mean well, but would do real harm. And therefore, it justifies at times a sort of, as you suggest, we don't think about how is this actually going to affect the other person at a personal level. It's our job is to win because we care about the country. There are a ton of things that we could be doing different about that. And this is maybe more of a technical answer than we would get into and too much nuance, but I'll just say briefly, part of the problem is the way our current political parties, both Democrat and Republican, are currently constructed is it tends to reward those candidates because the sort of people that vote for candidates in the primary tend to be the most radical within those parties themselves. Both parties are not playing toward, I don't necessarily want to say more moderate in the sense of political moderate, but more moderate in the sense of those who are not seeking liberal tiers or conservative tiers, say. Those who elevate individuals such as Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are in the driver's seat of the Republican and the Democratic parties right now. That could change. It hasn't always been that way. Part of the problem is the lowercase d democratization of our parties, where they're mostly done out of primaries and there's no sort of vetting effort among elites within the parties to say, well, who best represents our brand? It tends to be those who are able to whip a crowd into shape, which unfortunately rewards demagogues. My first initial thoughts when you say that, I think what you suggest is nice and laudable. I don't think it's ever realizable in totality in the imperfect world we have. I don't think we've ever had that. But there is no question that we have in our history had a politics that was less divisive, less mean-spirited, more conducive to good government, good society, goodwill to other people. And I do think it is reasonable to hope for that.
But, I'm remembering back to 92, I was 12 years old. I remember seeing him on the news, and it made national news even. Rodney King, LA riots. He said, can't we all just get along? I feel that way right now. I don't know who to trust. I don't know what news organization is really, quote unquote, has my best interest at heart, or maybe even your best interest at heart. What I've typically done in the past is I just don't care anymore. I have no dog in the fight. I just stop caring. It almost becomes this glazed over, like, okay, well, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I mean, Oregon has, I think I looked this up one time, we have electoral college vote of like 4, I think it is. It's not very many. So our little state is typically blue even. I can't even remember the last time it was red, probably not in my lifetime. And with that being said, by the time all the other voting and all the other states come in, like Oregon's one of the last states of the night to kind of get one, if you will. And I'm like, did my vote even matter? Did it even count? Does it even matter? Why should people vote? Why are you voting?
People get very emotionally torn on this issue. And I honestly feel bad for people because I think they have to do all kinds of mental gymnastics of convincing themselves that the person that they believe they need to vote for is a better candidate than they actually are. And the person they're not voting for is a worse candidate than they actually are. And I say all that because, look, I'm coming to you as I'm a podcaster, I'm an activist, I am very involved in politics. I did not vote for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. I actually didn't vote for anyone. I voted for other candidates on the ballot, no one in the presidential election. Part of that's just the accident. I live in Oklahoma. I only had 3 choices between Trump, Clinton, Gary Johnson, who was running as the Libertarian candidate that year. So I couldn't even write in somebody's name. 2020 did the same thing. I did not vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And unless something pretty miraculous happens, I don't see myself voting for Trump or Kamala Harris. Now, that's not necessarily normal for me. I just have felt very strongly, 2016, 2020, and probably in 2024, that both candidates were so unfit, in my view, for the office that they were seeking, that they didn't deserve my vote. And I didn't feel like I was shirking my duty as an American to withhold it. I recognized, just as you suggest, Oregon, Oklahoma, it's the same thing. Honestly, it's not even a matter of how many electoral votes we have. It's a matter of, we know how Oregon and Oklahoma are going to vote, right? If Oklahoma goes blue or Oregon goes red, we already know how the entire presidential election went. And I want to be careful here. I'm not trying to give this speech of like, it does not matter. It does matter. Of course it matters. But it doesn't matter necessarily as much as I think sometimes we value this thing. I would invite you, and I do this often to other people, I would invite people to broaden their understanding of what politics means, what it means to care about these things. I care deeply. I don't vote sometimes because I care deeply. Because I say these individuals do not deserve the office they're running for. It's not a high principle person. Nobody's truly perfect. Nobody truly deserves these offices. Certain in my mind, okay, we've passed a threshold where they're so unfit for this office that I cannot in good faith vote for them. That's not the same as saying you don't have to care about things. You can care deeply. And I would even suggest in a democratic republic, in a free republic, it is 10,000 times more important the kind of person you are. Do you conduct yourself honestly in business? Are you a good husband and father? How do you behave yourself in your community? It counts so much more than which box you happen to check on election day, because on an individual basis, it's not as if you're going to sway the election one way or another. And I would even go so far as to say the biggest reason your vote would matter is what it says about you. It's not that you're actually impacting things directly, it's that you're being impacted by it. A lot of people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016 who said, look, he's not the ideal candidate, but I prefer him over Hillary Clinton. I understand that argument. I'm not faulting anyone for that. But a lot of those same individuals said, I'm going to hold his feet to the fire to make sure that he becomes the kind of person he needs to hold these sort of beliefs and views that I do. And when he does stray from that, I want to put pressure on him. Most of those people didn't change Trump. Trump changed them. And I think the act sometime of voting for someone, I think that cognitive dissonance causes us to justify it in a sense. We have to believe that what we did was morally right. And I would just invite people to not hold their vote as so sacred that it has to say that about them. Maybe who you are as a person is far more important than who you voted for. Maybe we ought not to castigate or judge people for who they voted for, because who knows why they did that. They may have had a good reason. Maybe they didn't. That's not my place to judge. But they ought to be decent individuals, decent people in society. That is something that we can all aspire to be.
For years, my dad and maybe the older generations of this world said, if you don't vote, shut your mouth. You don't
Yeah.
get to say anything. You have no right to say anything. You can't complain. You can't do anything. And it's like, well, wait a second. Hold on. Time out on the floor. It's still America. We still have the freedom of speech. And my dad's like, well, that should be taken from you. If you didn't vote, you have no freedom of speech anymore. I'm like, well, come on, Dad. I don't know about that one. A number of years back, but we did have a political show, and we had an author come on, and he wrote a book called Homeless Christian. And he talked about the fact that he really had no political affiliation.
I think I saw that book in your collection of books you recommended or enjoyed. Think about it.
That's our way of trying to honor the author.
Yeah.
We have the page called Books That I Love. And there's some great books on there. Segue real fast. If you're looking for a great book, they're on there. There's a bunch on there. But in that, I really struggled with that because I thought, okay, if I'm a person of faith, which I am, was Jesus political? Did Jesus care about if Caesar was the emperor? Did he care that Herod was the governor of Judea? Like, did he care about that stuff? Did he go and vote? Did he struggle with these candidates that seemed to like hate each other? When Trump was shot at, it just seemed like they didn't really care. And I thought to myself again, politics aside, I don't know the man personally. Obviously, I've never met him. I'd love to. I'd love to have a Tucker Carlson type moment and sit with him and have a one-on-one with him. I'd invite you, Josh, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
But in those moments, set all that junk aside and just think about it as a person.
Mm-hmm.
He almost lost his life. The next day, they're like, we're going to tone it down. We're going to turn the vote. No, you didn't. Neither side did, by the way, for the record.
Mm-hmm.
Neither side did. Again, it makes me come back to, can't we just see these people as who they are? This isn't Hunger Games. This isn't American Idol. This is real life stuff. And somebody almost died. And we're like, meh, you suck. And maybe that's why I was so curious about that question for you. And I know it's a big question and it's a broad question. It's a hard question to answer. If I could pick one thing to change about them, and maybe this is where you maybe help me, is I would honestly ask them, stop talking about each other. Like, stop talking about, well, that side's going to do that. No, I'm going to do that. Well, they said they're going to do, like, stop that. Just tell me what you're going to do. Don't say, well, Trump's going to do this and now I'm going to do that. And Kamala may say, well, I'm going to do this and Trump's never going to do that. Like, I don't care. Tell me what you're going to do. That would be my one thing I would change, is you can only talk about what you're going to do. You can't talk about the other person. In fact, if you do, you have to forfeit, let's say, I don't know, 10,000 votes. That seems like a lot. Like in hockey, there's a penalty box. In football, there's a penalty, 5-yard penalty, 10-yard penalty, 20-yard pass interference. Basketball, there's foul shots. There's a penalty when you do something dumb, make a mistake. In political arenas, it's no holds bar.
Part of the tragedy of human politics, the systems that develop those penalties tend to be authoritarian regimes. That is the dual nature of living in a free society. We can all act like idiots, and we often do. Who is the referee that's going to step in and say, Trump, you can't do that. You've just lost 10,000 votes. I don't want to live in that system because I could easily see that being exploited to somebody's benefit or someone's detriment. So instead, it is incumbent upon us to behave ourselves like adults, to maybe stop elevating these yahoos. Quite frankly, in the national parties, I think some of this is we, the people, are to blame for putting these people in these positions in the first place. That being said, you said something very important that there is no possible way I'm going to give a satisfactory answer to, but maybe we could dip our toes into. Was Jesus political? Excellent question. You've described yourself as a follower of Christ. I'm a Christian. We're both followers of Christ. And it seems to be a pretty important thing to work out. Is the person we're following telling us to get involved in politics or not? Very good, decent, and extremely intelligent Christians have worked into this issue and have come out with, I wouldn't say necessarily diametrically opposed views, but certainly a lot of nuance and a lot of room within there. I actually had on my podcast Jonathan Cole. He's in Australia. He is a political theologian by profession. Brilliant guy. I mean, that's what he does. He tries to understand within the Christian tradition and within the text of Scripture what political implications or lack thereof can we derive from this. One of the more famous, Christ himself lifts the coin, asks whose emblem is on this, Caesar's. Render unto Caesar's that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. I think Christianity allows for the very government that causes the human flourishing that you and I enjoy. I think Christianity allows us to say, you know what? There is an earthly realm, and political things do matter, but they don't matter in an eternal sense. And things like love and justice, while they are higher virtues, say, there is no true political system of love or true political system of justice. You know, those that pursue justice with a capital J, say in a political sense, you end up with something like Marxism. You end up with something that that is so principle based that it doesn't have the ability to negotiate, to allow for the fact that maybe it is wrong. And I think Christianity allows us to be wrong. It allows us to live our lives in a way that really bothers someone else and may not be the air quotes right way to live. But it turns out how you live your life to God is far more important. And it is not incumbent upon the government to constrict us into perfection. Rather, that is God's business. That is what he is attempting to work in our lives. I think the answer, was Christ political? Ought we Christians to be political? Is yes and no, is complicated, is nuanced. I think it invites us to care deeply about this world and the things of this world while still recognizing this world is not our home. Godliness is to be reflected here in this world, and we ought to cultivate the earth. And I think politics is part of that. It's not just about mowing your yard. It's also about being a good and decent person. It's also about caring about those systems that allow for human flourishing, that reduce poverty to the extent it is possible. But it is also about looking beyond this world and saying, in the end, this is temporal. In the end, what is truly important is, am I someone who is cultivating love and justice in my heart?
But being that you're from Oklahoma, I'm going to guess you've probably heard of the Duke, North Carolina rivalry, right?
I really hate to disappoint you. I don't mind talking about almost any topic, but I am so sports illiterate. I just don't know that I'm going to be all that interesting, other than maybe a little entertaining because I'm so ignorant.
But that's my point, is to me, living in Oregon and being a North Carolina fan is like standing alone.
Right.
In the middle of the ocean, screaming at the top of my lungs, people should care about Carolina basketball. It doesn't make sense.
Literally the other side of the country.
Exactly. It doesn't make sense to me. I have friends that have joined me in my fandom. The very first act I did in this room was we watched Duke, North Carolina basketball. And he knows. People know. I mean, I've taken time off of work to go watch this game. I will stop my life to go watch this game. But again, it's my fandom. I don't expect everybody else to join me in that fandom, in that boat. I mean, I wish they would. It'd be great. They don't. And I guess I parallel that to you in your situation. Is why does young Josh, let's say 12 years old, because that's really when I became a Carolina fan, but why get into this arena? I mean, you could have picked any facet of life to spend your life work doing. Why this?
Yeah, good question. Again, good question has lots of different pieces to it. 12 is probably about the right age I sort of got into politics. I got in at you're right, we're about the same age. I call myself a geriatric millennial because I'm right on that cusp. I'm assuming you're probably more really,
I don't know
really,
what
really...
I am. I'm 44. I was born in 80, so I don't know if I'm a Gen Z. I don't know if I'm a Gen Y. I'm a Gen awesome. That's what I am.
I think I've heard you guys called the Xennials because we don't know where to put you. And maybe I'm Gen X. I don't know. Anyhow, around that same era that you're getting an interest in North Carolina and sports, I'm developing an interest in politics. Now, let's be frank. 12, 13 years old, this wasn't exactly a well-developed view. Democrat bad, Republican good. And I mostly got this from listening to Untold Hours of Rush Limbaugh. I mean, that was my political hero growing up. I didn't stay there, thank God. That was my introduction. And I can't explain this, but whatever that bug is in your head that makes you interesting about sports, I have that for politics. Politics was my sports. I just found it exciting and interesting and wanted to learn about it. And there was an element of team sports to it. Now, that being said, who I hope I have developed and become, and I still have that a little bit. I get excited on election night. I get excited about these things. I also recognize a mature Josh needs to be able to distinguish between politics as fandom and politics as something that is important within our lives. And let me be very clear here. As much as I am sports illiterate and not that interested in it, I think few things would destroy our country faster than if professional sports just disappeared all of a sudden, because all of a sudden there would be an awful lot of men out there in particular that would not have a creative outlet, and God help us what they would end up doing with their time. Probably go to war the next day with somebody, who knows. In any way denigrating sports when I say this, I just think that politics and sports, while they do have that same capacity for having a sort of team fandom, say, they're also two very different things. We wouldn't confuse politics with sports, just as we wouldn't confuse politics with, say, Christianity. These are different realms. They hold certain values. Think that as a person matures, they ought to recognize a true, healthy view of politics is one that is not always looking for Team Red as if they're incapable of making a mistake, and always looking at Team Blue as if they're incapable of doing anything correct. But as someone who recognizes, wait a minute, there's some deeper underlying ideas here that I ought to be comporting myself to, and I ought to even hold my side accountable if they stray from those ideas. And here's a hard one. Maybe those ideas that I have in my head aren't right. Maybe I need to consistently be checking myself with the arguments on the other side say. maybe their ideas are better, and I'm not to live in fear about hearing their arguments. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I need to invite the possibility. It strengthens your own arguments if you listen to the other side. Again, I guess I'm kind of answering two separate questions, but yeah, 12 is about when I got into the fandom of politics. Recognized as I got older that politics has to be more than fandom if it's going to be a healthy pursuit.
Do you have an elephant tattoo?
Well, I'm drinking from an elephant mug. I'm all over the room, I suppose, but no, that's probably says more to do with the I just don't have tattoos.
Okay. Going back to this again, it's the only way I can truly relate, I feel like.
Fair enough.
Is I have a lot of North Carolina stuff. In fact, we have this newly built house and we had some friends over and I was showing them around and showing them the house. I love to do that. I love to show people what we built and what my wife put together, and she did a great job. And so I take one of our...
I've got to say, by the way, I'm digging the North Carolina color behind it. The paint job is just phenomenal. It is a sharp looking room.
Thank you. It's 11 by 11, so it's not huge, but it's perfect for what we need it for. Everything that the house has. And so I take them to my wife and I's room. And so then you have to walk through our bedroom to get to our master bathroom. And we have a really big shower, like big. It's massive. So people are always wanting to see that. And I don't know, that seems to be an attractive feature of the tour, if you will. A definite, you got to stop there kind of thing. And so then I take them back into our closet, because then beyond our bathroom is a little commode and then into our walk-in closet. No door, by the way, for the closet. This young lady who comes to our house, her name's Brooke. Brooke goes, well, I can tell which side's yours. And I kind of looked at her and I said, well, yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious, boy clothes, girl clothes. She goes, well, yes, there is that element, Neil. She goes, do you not have a shirt that's not light blue? I was like, yeah, I got some navy ones here. Yeah, it's fine. And she's just like, I mean, I get you're a Carolina fan. I mean, wow, but I didn't realize like you could go a couple of weeks and be okay. I was like, well, yeah, I don't like to do laundry, so I like to have a lot of clothes. But I say all that because I've met people who have gone to North Carolina, actually gone to the school there, unlike me. And I've shown them, I have a North Carolina tattoo. I have the ram on my left arm. And everyone that I've met so far is like, wow, okay, that's another level. That's a fandom that I can't even understand or explain. I'm sold out. I will look at that tattoo with fondness. Now, I know everybody's like, oh, tattoos, whatever, you shouldn't. There's arguments both ways. If you were going to help me gain your fandom or join you in your fandom, why should I care about politics? Because again, I've tried for years to get people to care about Carolina basketball. I've tried. I have a few friends that have quote unquote discipled and made converts of. They come and watch games with me. Some just come to watch me cry, because that has happened a time or two where I've just been very emotional after a Carolina game. It is very emotional for me. And my brother-in-law will never forget the day that I'm in the Dean Smith Center and I'm weeping. And he's like, why are you crying? I'm like, I've always dreamed of being here. It's an emotional moment. Help me. How could you help me become more of a political person where I sort of care? Because at this point, I feel like, again, looking at my fandom, people are like, so you're a Carolina, big deal.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. Well, I'll tell you what, let me start in the negative sense. One of my great political heroes, Edmund Burke, possibly who I would consider to be the greatest conservative. Guy died 200 years ago, wrote some amazing things. He's probably one of the quotes he's best known for. All it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. And so to start at the negative end, say, the problem with you not caring, and by you, I mean in the universal sense, if you don't care about politics, that doesn't mean politics goes away. And it might mean politics gets a lot worse. It might mean that you could have been one of those good men who did nothing that thwarted evil, in a sense. Now, let me be very careful with evil. I'm not trying to say Trump is evil or Kamala Harris is evil. Human nature is capable of evil. We are all capable of evil. Cede the political process, say, to those who care deeply for the wrong reasons doesn't exactly mean you're going to live a life that's good and prosperous and peaceable. That's in the negative sense. And let me acknowledge here up front, I do not want everyone to care about politics as much as I do. I think that's a dangerous world. I want a world in which people think it's important, and people in particular are proud to be an American and proud to live in a country in which we have a voice and the ability to exercise and think for ourselves. But I also think one of the greatest problems with our politics right now is a good many people care about it that probably would be better off bird watching or learning origami or doing something else. And I don't mean they're terrible people. I just mean they have misunderstood politics to be this sort of team sport that pings that part of our brain that probably they need to be North Carolina fans. They probably need to be getting that outlet through something that doesn't involve who we go to war with. And again, I'm not saying sports doesn't matter, but sports is a healthy outlet for that sort of thing. And I think sometimes people misconstrue that. So, what I would say is that I do want people to be more invested and care more about politics, provided they take a good hard look at the kind of people that they are. We all have a different threshold for when our politics begins to degrade us. I would like to think I tend to have a higher threshold. I can spend a lot of time on social media, not forever, and I do try to limit myself. But it doesn't necessarily tear me down as quickly as some other people. There are some people who, for very good reason, have said, you know what? Social media is not for me. I don't like who I become when I'm on there. And I'm not saying nobody else should either, but I'm not going to get involved. I think individuals need to have a healthy level of tension in their life where they're engaged with people on the air quotes other side. And to be fair, there isn't two sides. There's thousands of sides. I think that's one of the beauties as you involve yourself in this, you realize just how complex human nature is and how we have this tendency wrongly to put people in these boxes. But it's good as a conservative to talk to progressives to a degree. We want a healthy tension. We want a healthy dialogue. Thank God we live in a country where we can have that. Bad things are going to happen if we all don't get involved, if the right people aren't involved. There is a good reason to be involved. I would also say that we have an unprecedented blessing in human existence of the nation that we live in. And I don't mean in any way to put anybody in a guilt trip, but it is worth pondering. What does it mean to actually possess the gift of liberty? How many humans that have walked the face of the earth couldn't have even conceived of the idea that Neil and Josh could have got together and have a conversation about this without risk of having their tongues torn out or being imprisoned or really fearing any sort of thing other than maybe some people they've never heard of saying nasty things about them on Twitter. And I'm not saying that doesn't come at some cost. What a wonderful privilege. If there is even the slightest inkling in you that, you know what, I think this is something I could do or involve myself in at a certain level, I think it is something that we ought to feel both pride and gratitude toward that we even have that opportunity. Countless multitudes of humans from the moment we were created, say, have never had or could have even imagined.
How does Donald Trump win your vote? And then on the flip side of that coin, how does Kamala Harris win Josh's vote?
Given the tumultuous natures of 2016, 2020, and good grief, can 2024 get any crazier? We've had an assassination, a leading candidate that appeared comatose in a debate and then announced he wasn't running. This is the weirdest year. So I don't want to say things like I would never vote for Trump because I've always maintained I'm concerned the Democrats would nominate the reincarnated corpse of Joseph Stalin. I have to be like, okay, as a negative, I've got to vote for Trump at this point. I am relatively firm on my commitment that there is very little Trump could do. I don't want to open a can of worms here, and I'm sure some listeners would scoff at this notion, but to me, it's conceivably possible. Trump, when he was president, I was not a fan of his. I didn't vote for him. He didn't do anything when he was president that made me think he deserved another term in office, but it was conceivably possible he could have. January 6th was sort of the Rubicon for me. He had always questioned the validity of the elections when he ran against Hillary Clinton. To me, that is the one threshold you cannot cross, because once you have undermined our electoral system, there is no going back. And he hasn't entirely. We still have a very robust system. I'm not implying that he has. I cannot, in good faith, support someone who has done something no other president has ever done. And to me, that is wholly disqualifying. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just hard for me to think of a scenario. Kamala Harris is a little bit more of a wild card because she's a senator. We know what she talks about. I'm not saying I am clueless as to where she stands on issues. It's a little bit hard because she's never been president. She's never been a governor. It's hard for me to say, here's how she behaves as an executive. That being said, I recognize the agenda she is laying out as being so much the antithesis of where I would like to see the country going that it would be difficult for me to vote for her. I don't have any problems with her on a personal level. It is amazing the degree to which she's exploded on the scene. I stand with the majority of the Americans who have been saying for 4 years, seems like screaming at the top of our lungs, we do not want a Trump-Biden rematch. And I'm not saying that Kamala Harris is a great candidate, but finally somebody listened and gave us someone other than Biden and Trump. And I think that's part of the reason she has done so well. Probably also she's learned to keep her mouth shut. Very skeptical that either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump could do anything between now and election day where I'd say either of them are deserving of the office that they see. Possibly that's a very cynical view on my part. It's hard for me to think of anything they could do at this point to make me change my mind about them.
So in your mind, you haven't seen enough from either one of them to warrant you to check a box.
I think it may be better to say I've seen too much at least from Trump. I've seen too much to warrant checking the box.
That's, to me, the scary part. I want our future generations to inherit a country that they too can be proud of.
Mm-hmm.
We just had the Olympics finish up this last summer. And to me, one of those precious moments in the Olympics, as a sports fan that I am, is seeing those high profile athletes weeping as they hear the national anthem. Not kneeling, not hands in their pockets, generally hand on their heart, singing along. And to me, I think that's the hard part in our world right now. One of these guys on Sports Talk Radio talking about the Olympics, and he was talking about the political scene and all that. He kind of wove that in. And then he made this just declaration. He said, I hate this song, God Bless the USA by Lee Greenwood. He's like, I hate it. And I was like, what? This is a nationally syndicated radio. You can't say that. It's a free country. He can say whatever he wants. It's my show. I can say whatever I want. But it hurt me because I thought that song to me emphasizes who we are as a people. And he's like, well, I hate it because we had to sing it every morning in school. And, we do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we had to sing the song. I was like, okay, then say that. Say, you know what? I really got tired as a child. We had to sing it all the time. So I learned to I don't like the song. That's fine. But when you say you hate something, I hate something. There are very few things in this world that I can say I truly hate. I hate peas. I hate them. I don't like them. I don't buy them. I don't want them bought. My daughter, even when she was little, my mom tried to get her to eat peas. My daughter just unequivocally says, my dad says I don't have to eat peas. True story. I don't like bananas. I darn near hate bananas too. I hate those two things. Like, I don't want them around me. I believe there is a hell. I think hell is all the things you hate in this world. So Ohio State sweaters will be there in my mind, and Duke sweaters will be there, and peas and bananas will be in hell. That's what they serve you. And you have to wear a Duke sweater the whole time. That seems awful. I wouldn't want any of those things. But when you say you hate something, that's a whole different level. Like, I can not like something. Okay, fine. I don't like bacon on a maple bar. Like, that just seems weird. I don't like that. I don't hate it. So right now, if somebody's listening to you, Josh, and they're like, okay, I hate the Democrats or I hate the Republican, what would be your counsel to them?
I would cancel meeting a couple of them because they're wonderful people, Democrats and Republicans. This is nobody's fault, but we have the problem in this country of the great sort. Demographically, we are increasingly moving to red and blue concentrated areas, and it creates the possibility where people can live in a sea of red or blue and not really even know who the other side is. It hurts when I hear stuff like that I hate the Democrats or I hate the Republicans, because both sides, Democrats and Republicans, have this notion in mind that they are the true inheritors of the American tradition, the American nation. They are the true protectors of liberty. The Republicans want to make America great again. And I think sometimes it is incumbent upon people to stop and reflect for just a moment that radical Antifa student somewhere in Massachusetts is just as much a red-blooded American as I am here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Our politics are radically different, and I'm not saying there's anything laudable about Antifa, and certainly there are some parts of the left that I think it is appropriate to denounce. But that's an American. That's a human being who is an American, and it is wrong to say because of you voted for Team Red or Team Blue, or you identify with Team Red or Team Blue, that somehow that makes you not American. If you truly if you hate Republicans and Democrats, you hate America. You do not love your country, or at the very least, you don't love a good population within the country. And what does that say about you? How small-minded, how sad of a life to live, how closed, I don't want to say shelter, that's not the right way to put it, but how tiny of a world to live in, where you don't have the capacity to imagine that there are good and decent people who simply don't agree with you. So I think it's trying to think of how to put this. In the book Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton, it's a theological argument for God, but he does not start with truth. He says, we'll get there eventually. We're going to talk about what is true and what is not, but let's start with health first. What beliefs do we hold, and whether they're true or not, are very unhealthy for us? And I can think a few beliefs less healthy than to hate people because of their political affiliations. I think that destroys us, not just as a nation, but as an individual. I mean, what an awful thing to carry around with you.
That might be the next thing I would change. You can't talk bad about somebody, and then you can't hate. I think when you're truly hating somebody, you're done with them. You've written them off. You've cast them aside. They are no longer of value to you. I had a friend actually saying, you probably won't get this joke per se, but maybe we'll give it a chance. But I had somebody ask me once, they said, Neil, if you got so big time You're syndicated. You have this weekly show. You're getting paid buku bucks to do your show. I'm like, man, this sounds like an amazing thing. Let's make this happen. And they said, okay. And you got this big network sponsor and they're throwing a ton of dollars at you. I'm like, do I get shoes out of the deal? And they go, yeah, you get shoes out of the deal. Okay. I'm like, all right. Like MJ, I get a new pair of shoes every show because he wore a new pair of shoes every game, which I tried to do the math on that and my brain started hurting because that was a lot of shoes. But I say that. And then this friend says to me, he says, so your first guest that the network books for you. You have your own booker now. I'm like, that's amazing. I love it. Kind of like the power still to have that. But all right, I'll go with this weird analogy you're giving me. And they go, and then your first guest is Mike Krzyzewski, which I know means nothing to you. But Mike Krzyzewski is the head coach of Team USA. Not this last time, but the time before. He's also predominantly the coach at the University of Duke, men's basketball.
Gotcha.
And my friend said, would you take him as a guest? And I was like, I don't know. And they go, no, there's no I don't know here. There's a yes or a no. And I said, I struggle with that because I think to myself, does that man have value? And I struggle with that as a fan, not as a broadcaster, not as an interviewer, not as a host, but as a fan. Does my fandom overshadow the value of someone? Is how do you not let your fandom overshadow the value of someone else?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it is also important that we, again, distinguish between sports and politics. Well, let me put it this way. We Christians are called to forgive, but that doesn't mean we're also called to be discerning. We're also called to judge prudential matter, what is likely to happen. I'm an auditor by trade. Try to find people perpetrating fraud. And there's a lot of individuals who have done so, worked for governments, perpetrated fraud, served their time. And I can forgive them all day long, but I'm not going to put them back in a position where they can do that again to people. Then I'm harming other people, or potentially. If you know someone has molested a child or raped someone, say, maybe you can get to the point where you forgive them. You're not going to let them babysit your kid. Even if you believe they've completely accepted Christ and completely reformed, it doesn't mean they're deserved. A lot of pastors have screwed up, and it doesn't mean they're lesser people, but we don't put them back on the depending on what it is that's happened, we ought not necessarily elevate them. So I guess the reason I'm saying all this is because I think we need to discern sometimes. You can love a person with abandon. You can truly forgive a person, say in a political sense. That doesn't mean you have to platform them. It doesn't mean you have to treat them as if all that they're saying is worthwhile. And again, I'm trying to be a little careful here because I guess in a sports sense, that might be a little bit different threshold. There are a lot of individuals who I would not platform on my podcast, not because I desire to hate them. I hope that I love them as much as people I agree with, but because I recognize that they represent certain ideas that I don't think need an equal airing. Or at the very least, if I were to platform on the podcast, I would do so with different discernment. I would make sure that the audience is aware of where my disagreements are. I might have a debate with them, say, that would be fine, but I wouldn't treat them the same as someone that I completely agreed with. And I think this is important because one of the Christians have a lot of verses we misquote or misapply in scripture. The world does too about Christianity. I think the one that they're the worst at is judge not, which is 2 words from Sermon on the Mount. It's not even the whole verse, judge not. If we're going to base scripture on 2 words alone, you can make it say anything you want. For example, commit adultery. Those 2 words show up in scripture. Judge not, lest ye be judged. For it talks about Christ, talks about you will be judged by that measurement you use. In other words, I don't think Christ means you can't discern. It means you can't condemn. We're all of the same stock. We're all human. We're all fallen. We're all in need of God's grace. Don't put down someone else and elevate yourself. That doesn't mean you can't say this is right and this is wrong. And I think that really does cut to the heart of how you can invest in politics without being judgmental in that condemning sense. We are all humans. We're fallible. We can discern the difference between what is right and wrong, but that doesn't mean we lower people in our mind as if we're somehow better than who they are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key. I think that's the struggle that we've run into as a country. I think it was Mike Wallace, and I could be wrong on it, but it was an really old 60 Minutes interview with Morgan Freeman. And he asked Morgan Freeman, how do you end racism? And Morgan Freeman said, you stop talking about it. Again, it could be Mike Wallace, could be somebody else. Whoever the interviewer was shocked. Wait, hold on, Morgan. What do you mean we stop talking about it? You just simply stop talking about it. Like, I'm a man, I'm an American, and that's it. That's where it should stop. Not I'm a black man, not I'm an African-American man. I'm just a man in America. That's it. That's all I am. And I was like, but could that work? Because I feel like in this country, again, I hear on one side of the fence, the blue side, we'll call it, Oh, they're awful. They're horrible. They're terrible people. They're going to ruin our country. They're going to run this country into the ground. Trump's a dictator. Trump's this, Trump's that. And then you change the channel to Fox or to whoever. Fox seems to be the big one. And they're like, oh, listen, Kamala this, Kamala that. Like, she is just awful and she's terrible and she's all these things and she's a monster. And it's like, well, who do I believe? Who do I truly believe? And so next week for me is really going to be hard. But I think, and I know they say it every year, it seems like every political cycle, this is the moment. I even said it, right? This is the moment we're going to be remembering. This is the moment we tell our grandkids about. I don't know if it's going to be that big of a thing. But I will say this. Somebody needs to fix this world. And sadly, I've read a book once or twice or 3 times or 4 times that this world doesn't last. This world sadly is going to get destroyed. And really at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're red. It doesn't matter if you're blue. It doesn't matter if you're green. It doesn't matter if you're purple. It doesn't matter if you're Carolina blue. That might matter. All that matters really, and maybe Josh, you can echo this, but all that really matters at the end of the day is who you will bow your knee to.
I would agree with that. I would just add that who you bow your knee to does have an impact on the kind of person you are in this temporal world. It does matter how I vote or don't vote. It does matter how I conduct myself, the ideas I allow to infiltrate my mind. I mean, we talk about this as Christians, that we are to capture these ideas for the cause of Christ. It's not that we're just empty-headed, or it's not that we're so cynical we say, well, no idea out there can penetrate me. But you're right. In an eternal sense, all that matters is who we bow our knee to. But let's do that now. Let's do that now on earth. Let's show that here on earth, we Christians are capable of behaving like just and loving people, even in our politics.
And I guess that's where I'm at, is how are we going to treat our neighbor? How are we going to treat the person we don't necessarily agree with? But back in November of last year, I went to a North Carolina football game. For whatever reason, my father-in-law, I think still to this day, thought it would be so funny that he got me tickets on the away side of the North Carolina game. There's a home side and an away side. So the away side is the Duke fans. Mm-hmm. Duke was away that game. So they were the away team. And so we got to the stadium early because, of course, I was just jacked up about being there. And we immediately, I just am making friends everywhere I go because I'm there for my Carolina fandom and met some really nice people. One of them was an alum of Carolina and she was there with her family. A couple of people were there from out of town, from New York. They were big Carolina fans too. So, I mean, it was just like this cool reunion moment for me, like meeting all these people from all walks of life, from all over the United States coming to this Carolina game. And Duke's their arch rival, as we already talked about. We're standing up, we're cheering, we're doing our thing, and these kids come in late to the game, which whatever, three guys. And they seemed a little inebriated, I will say. And so it's like this couple that I met down from me, and then my brother-in-law, and then these 3 guys. So they're on the other side of my brother-in-law. And one of them, in a drunken state, I think, says, hey, man, I go to Duke. Can I shake your hand? And I looked at my brother-in-law and I said, no, he cannot shake my hand. He cannot touch me. No. And my brother-in-law's like, listen, he's not going to give you cooties or something. Like, what? I've never seen you act like this. I'm like, he's a Duke fan. There's nothing good about him. And so, the game goes on and it's super close, by the way. It goes into double overtime. One of the most amazing games I've ever seen, not only in TV, but in real life. I stormed the field with the other one of my amazing Carolina fans. And so we're on the field. Right before that, this guy, remember, very, very distinctly says to me, hey, man, game's over. Great game. You guys won. Go celebrate. Before you go, can I get a hug from you? And I looked at my brother-in-law and I said, he's going to be standing there a while because I'm not hugging or touching that guy. And we left. I went down on the field. My brother-in-law somehow found me in the sea of people. And I remember that moment now. It kind of has stirred in me. Am I willing to give a hug to somebody that I find absolutely repulsive, that has different ideology than I do, that might even, I know it sounds silly, but might even worship the devil? And I keep coming back to what I said to that one person that had asked me, whose shoes am I not willing to put on? How have you found a way to help people put on a different pair of shoes?
Well, hopefully in some of those, that's a powerful story, by the way. I mean, I know we're talking about a sports game, but we've all been there. We've all been, I recall my next door neighbor who is in her 90s now, sharp as a tack. I hope I'm as smart as she is. I wish I were as smart as she is now as she is in her 90s. When she was a little girl, they had this sort of Valentine's Day where they made cards for all the other school children, but she didn't make a card for a boy who was Polish because he had a funny last name. And that was 60 plus years earlier. And she still thinks about that. Why did I do that? Why did I think of this person as the other? And part of it is, I mean, let's just be honest, it's human nature. There is the capacity for racism, for all sorts of isms that run throughout our heart. And I understand you're telling a far more lighthearted story. You can do that in a fun manner, right? Sports rivalry. You don't have to debase a person to say, I refuse to shake your hand, but you can in your heart and your mind. And I think you're right. We do in sports. How much more likely are we to do this in an arena in which we say, this is how people live? This is how society ought to be constructed. This is going to affect my children. This is going to affect the people I care the most about. And yet I am still called to look to the person that has ideas that I think are destructive to things that I care the most about and to treat them as a human being, not their ideas. I don't have to agree with their ideas. I don't have to celebrate when they win, say, but I do have to treat them as a human being. I think that's, you ask how I cultivate it. I'm not perfect. I don't do that all the time. There are so many things in politics that drive me so nuts. It's hard. I think it is a daily habit, taking a breath, of stepping back, of realizing you can be passionate about your ideas and not hate other people. That's not in our nature as humans, but it is who we are called to be as Christians, and it is possible. And it is something that God does call all of us to.
That, by the way, is why I'm calling this episode A House Divided. Because I think it's true. So, Josh, if people want to get in touch with you, if there's ways that they can maybe reach out to you and know a little bit more about you and kind of what you're about, how can they do that? And then we're going to turn it over to our favorite game.
Well, don't Google Josh Lewis or Saving Elephants, because you will never find me. But if you Google Josh Lewis Saving Elephants, you can. The website, savingelephants.blog.com. Or if you search for the podcast, you could probably find just by finding Saving Elephants. And I produce 2 original podcasts a month, have for years now. So definitely appreciate anybody who wants to pop by if they're interested in this conversation. They want to learn more. Believe me, we get deep into the weeds of political philosophy if that's your jam.
That's awesome. We will definitely link that in our show notes. And so without further ado, let's turn it over to our main man, Zach. Zach, take it away.
It's now that time in the show to play the fastest growing game in the podcast world. We call it Heel Hustle. Today our guest will try to answer all 6 of these questions in 60 seconds or less to win an Amazon gift card. Amazon not responsible for this commercial spot, nor did they pay to let us use their name. Audience, feel free to play at home. Are you ready? Let's put 60 seconds on that clock. Ready, set, hustle!
The game begins in 3, 2, 1.
All right, Josh, here we go. One person you would trade places with for a week.
Donald Trump.
Nice. Well said, especially in this moment. A guilty pleasure in life for you.
Oh, definitely sweets. I eat way too many sweets.
All right. Best compliment you ever received.
Your voice is so smooth it puts me to sleep.
I remember you saying that in the green room. That's still very good. Worst piece of advice you ever received.
Ooh, that's a good one. Gosh, I'm just going to have to reach for something. I think it would be choosing engineering as a profession.
All right. What is something you wish you were better at?
Sports.
Clearly. What's something that never fails to make you laugh? Hurry.
Oh, Impractical Jokers.
Ooh, got it just at the buzzer, we would say. Made it just by the skin of your teeth. Thank you, Zach, for providing us with Heel Hustle. Zach, not a paid actor, but he is available for bar mitzvahs and special events. Josh, thank you, man. Thank you for tapping into this political side of me that I never, ever like to look at. I appreciate you bringing that out of me. We probably could play a game out of all the sports references I used in relation to your political excitement. Thank you for allowing us to have and walk in that conversation with you today. Appreciate that.
Yeah, Neil, I definitely appreciate it. I had a great conversation. Thanks for having me on.
Josh, of course, was the miraculous 7. And so Josh was gracious enough to give us another moment. As you might remember, a while back, we lost 7 shows. Josh was part of that 7. So again, thank you, Josh, for that. Just want to say thanks again one more time for you. All right, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, you house divided you. I mean what I say when I say what I mean. Listen, I've done a lot of jobs, okay? Admitting. One job in particular, I was selling radio advertising, I don't know why I tell you guys these stories. Maybe it's relatable. And I went into this restaurant that, by the way, doesn't exist anymore. They went out of business prior to them going out of business. I went into the 2:00 hour, which, by the way, is prime quiet restaurant time. And I walked in, I graciously was greeted by the head waitress, and I told her who I was, told her why I was there, and asked her if I could speak to the owner. Owner comes out after, by the way, about 10, 15 minutes of standing there. And I remember sticking my hand out. Customary, when you meet somebody, you stick your hand out. And I remember the owner looked at my hand and he said, "Why would I want to shake your hand? Why would I want to even touch you right now? I have nothing to do with you." And he turned around and walked away. I was so embarrassed. Did I got some in my teeth? Do I smell? Did I forget to put the Axe body spray on? Like what? And the waitress said, "I'm sorry, he's just having a bad day." I was like, "That's okay." But just remember, when I'm going and telling this story again, I will remember every detail of it. You tell him to have a nice day. Listen, I know you can have a bad day. I know you can have bad moments in life, but to refuse a handshake for someone, come on, man. So what do you do with that? Whose handshake might you be refusing today? Who have you said in your heart, they will never, ever set foot across my front door? They will never, ever get the gate code. Nope, never letting them in. Who's that for you? Think about it right now. And then before we go, ask yourself, when will they ever get access? And how long will you allow that to continue to be the house divided? Let me know. I'd be curious. I'm always curious about if you guys take these challenges seriously or not. Let me know. OPSpodcast.com is a great place to let me know. You can also let us know on the socials at OPS Podcast Show on our Facebook, Instagram, and X. With all that said, remember this. Remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned till next week when we walk in other people's shoes.